Tonight we are stepping back into the medieval world to uncover what life was really like for a night when the sun went down. From the warmth of the great hall to the cold silence of the watchtower, from whispered prayers to the clinking of armor. We will walk through the quiet and sometimes dangerous hours of the night. Before you get comfortable, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop your city name and local time in the comments so we know where in the world you are watching us from. When the sun dipped behind the hills and the last streaks of gold faded from the castle walls, the life of a medieval night shifted into a different rhythm. Unlike the chaotic roar of battle or the rigid drills of the day, the night carried a slower, more deliberate pace. A knight's duties did not vanish with the daylight, but they changed in nature. The clang of steel was replaced by the softer sounds of conversation, the creak of wooden benches, and the distant flicker of torches swaying in the cool night air. If the knight was stationed within a castle, the evening would begin in the great hall. This was not only the heart of the castle, but also its social center. Here knights gathered with lords, ladies, and fellow soldiers to share the evening meal. The atmosphere could range from quiet and reserved to loud and lively, depending on the occasion. On most nights, trenchers of bread-thick stews and roasted meats were passed along the long wooden tables. The food was hearty, meant to replenish the energy spent during the day, but it was also a chance to display hospitality. Wine and ale flowed freely, though a disciplined knight knew the dangers of overindulgence, especially with dawn training ahead. The meal was not just for eating, it was a time for bonding and for exchanging news. Stories of the day's events, tournaments, battles, and even hunting trips were told with enthusiasm. A young squire might sit nearby listening in wide-eyed fascination while secretly hoping to one day have stories of his own to share. Minstrels sometimes filled the air with soft tunes from a lute or harp, while gestures provided humor to lighten the mood. After all the political tensions and dangers of medieval life, a bit of laughter was welcome once the meal was done. The knight's duties varied. Some knights were expected to join the castle guard for night watch. This meant patrolling the walls or standing at posts, keeping an eye out for intruders or fires in the surrounding lands. A knight's presence on the wall was as much about discipline and morale as it was about actual security. Knowing that a seasoned warrior was part of the watch gave others in the castle a sense of safety for knights who are not on guard. Duty the hours after supper often meant training of a different kind. While daytime practice involved heavy armor and full-speed combat drills, nighttime training might focus on quieter skills, archery and low light, honing sword precision by candle or torch glow, and even practicing with lighter weapons to improve speed. These sessions were more personal, less about public display, and more about fine-tuning the instincts needed to survive when visibility was low. But not all of a knight's evening was spent in action. Reflection and faith were central to medieval knighthood, and many ended the day with prayer or quiet meditation. A small chapel inside the castle walls might be lit with candles, where a knight would kneel to give thanks for surviving the day and to seek protection for the night ahead. The ideals of chivalry demanded not only bravery in battle, but also devotion to God and to the moral code that separated a knight from a common mercenary. Evenings were also a time for tending to equipment. Armor and weapons took a beating during the day, whether from actual combat or daily drills. A knight might sit in the armory or his private quarters oiling chainmail, polishing a breastplate, or sharpening a sword. This was not simply maintenance. It was an act of respect toward the tools that protected his life. Rhythmic scrape of the whetstone or the soft clink of metal links was almost meditative. It was also an opportunity to inspect for damage that could prove fatal if ignored when traveling on campaign or stationed in the field. A knight's night was entirely different. Instead of stone walls and a roaring hearth, he might have only a tent and a small fire for comfort. The darkness outside the thin canvas was alive with the sounds of the night owls hunting wind in the trees, and the distant crack of branches, it could mean an animal or an enemy. The need for alertness never fully faded, and even in rest, a knight kept his sword within arm's reach social. Gatherings also played a role in a knight's nights. Particularly during times of peace, castles might host feasts, dances, or games. Knights were often expected to demonstrate not only martial skill, but also courtly manners they might dance with. Noble women engage in polite conversation or participate in storytelling contests. This was part of the chivalric ideal, the balance between being a warrior and a gentleman, a knight who could both defend the castle and charm. The court was highly valued. Despite the romantic image of the knight's life, knights could also be lonely, posting far from home. A winter storm cutting off travel, or the loss of comrades in battle, could weigh heavily. A knight might sit alone by a fire staring into the flames, replaying moments from the day or from long past. The medieval world was harsh and unpredictable, and even the most hardened warrior could not entirely escape moments of doubt or grief. Eventually, the time came to retire for the night. Sleeping arrangements depended greatly on rank and circumstance. A knight of high status might have a private chamber with a sturdy bed draped in heavy blankets, while a less wealthy knight might share a room with others sleeping on a simple straw mattress. The warmth of the hearth fire, if there was one, was precious in the cold months. The sounds of the castle settling for the night, footsteps fading, laughter from the hall turning into silence, and the occasional hoot of an owl outside marked the transition to rest. But rest was never absolute. A knock on the door, a shout from the guard tower, or the sudden blare of a horn could pull a knight from his bed in an instant. Armor might be thrown on hastily, weapons grabbed, and within moments, the peaceful night could become a rush to defend the walls. Such was the reality of medieval life. No matter how calm the evening seemed, a knight's duty was to be ready. In this way, the knights of a medieval night were a blend of routine and readiness. There was camaraderie and comfort, but always under the shadow of responsibility. Even in moments of leisure, the knowledge that danger could come at any time shaped every choice. Every night ended with the same truth, that when the sun rose again, the life of the knight would return to its full demand of strength, skill, and honor. And until that moment, he would live in the quiet rhythm between duty and rest, the torchlight flickering softly across stone walls, while the world beyond the castle slept or schemed in the dark. When darkness fully settled over the land, the castle became a world of its own. A medieval night moving through its torchlit corridors could feel both the weight of its history and the comfort of its protection. Thick stone walls held in the warmth from great hearth fires while keeping the dangers of the outside world at bay. At night, the castle was quieter, yet still alive with the subtle movements of servants' guards and the occasional echo of laughter from the great hall. A knight who was not on duty often began the night with a final round inside the castle, checking in on the garrison or speaking with fellow knights. Bonds between these men were forged not only in battle, but in countless small moments like these. A shared cup of ale, a quick exchange about the day's training, or a discussion of news from distant lands helped keep morale steady. The knight's presence was both a show of leadership and a way to keep his own mind sharp. Life inside the castle after dark was divided into layers. The lower levels, where the kitchens and storerooms lay, were still busy even late at night. Bread was baked for the morning meals, meat was salted or smoked for preservation, and barrels of ale were rolled into place. The smells drifted upward, mixing with the faint scent of beeswax from the candles above in the great hall. Any lingering company slowly trickled away until only a few quiet conversations remained. For the night, evening also meant tending to the needs of his squire, if he had one. The young apprentice was expected to help prepare armor for the next day, cleaning and oiling the pieces until they shone. The knight would inspect the work, offering corrections or praise. These moments were not just chores, but lessons in discipline and responsibility. A careless mistake in maintaining armor or weapons could cost a man his life, and a squire quickly learned that his knight expected nothing less than perfection. When the business of the day was truly done, the knight might seek the warmth of the solar, a private family chamber often reserved for moments of comfort. Here a smaller fire burned in the hearth, and cushioned chairs or benches lined the walls. This was where more personal matters were. Discussed letters might be read and written, illuminated by candlelight. A knight who had the skill might compose his own words to send home, or he might dictate to a clerk, who would carefully shape each letter on parchment. The letters could be about matters of duty, but more often, they carried thoughts of home, family, and the quiet hopes for the future. The castle chapel was another place that drew knights in the evening. Even if he had already attended prayers earlier in the day, the solitude of the chapel at night had a different quality. It was still lit by candles, but the air felt cooler, quieter, and more reflective. Kneeling before the altar, a knight might ask for guidance or give thanks for surviving another day. Prayer was as much a part of the knightly code as skill in battle, and many believed their honor and success came only with divine favor. The night also had its more light-hearted aspects. Castles often hosted games after supper. Chess was a favorite among knights, testing strategy and patience. Dice games and cards were popular as well, though some frowned upon them for the temptation of gambling. These games were not merely entertainment. They sharpened a knight's mind, teaching him to think several moves ahead, just as he would need to in combat. The laughter of a good game also relieved the constant weight of responsibility that came with his station. On some nights, visiting entertainers would perform in the hall. Singers, poets, and storytellers could hold an audience captive for hours. Knights often listened closely to the tales of faraway lands or legendary battles. Sometimes these stories carried lessons in courage, loyalty, or cunning that a wise knight could carry into his own life evenings. Like this reminded everyone that the life of a knight was not just about swords and armor, but also about culture, learning, and the telling of stories that would outlast them all. Yet not every night was safe or carefree. A messenger could arrive, even at midnight, bringing news of unrest and approaching army, or a request for aid. In such moments, the calm of the castle shifted instantly. Knights might be summoned to the war room, where maps were unrolled across large tables and candles flickered. Against the cold stone walls, plans were made, orders given, and horses prepared under the light of the moon. Transition from rest to readiness was immediate, for a knight's duty never truly slept. During long winter nights, when the cold seeped into every corner of the castle, warmth became a precious commodity. A knight might sit close to the fire in his chamber, wrapping himself in a thick cloak while the wind howled outside. Even then, work continued. He might carve wood for tool handles, repair straps on his armor, or mend a tear in a surcoat. Wasting time was a luxury knights rarely indulged in, and even in the quiet, they found tasks that strengthened their readiness. The relationships a knight kept inside the castle also shaped his knights. Friendships with other knights could be fierce and loyal, forged in both blood and laughter. Disputes also happened, whether over honor, pride, or simple misunderstanding, yet the bond of shared duty meant such quarrels were usually resolved quickly, for a divided garrison was a dangerous one. A wise knight knew that the people he dined with, laughed with, and guarded the walls alongside were the same people he might trust with his life. Finally, as the hour grew late, the castle entered a deeper stillness. The guards at the gates shifted quietly in the torchlight, while most of the inhabitants slept. For the knight whose duties for the day were done, the chamber offered a place of rest. The bed might be piled with furs or simple blankets, depending on his wealth, but it was welcome after hours of work and vigilance. Before closing his eyes, he would check that his sword or dagger was within reach, and that his armor was ready for the next day. The night might be calm, but the medieval world never promised that calm would last. In the stillness between waking and sleep, the knight could hear the small sounds of the castle settling, the creak of timber in the wind, the distant bark of a watchdog, the quiet hum of life continuing, even in darkness. It was in these moments that the knight perhaps felt most at peace, knowing that, for now, his home was safe, and his duty for the day complete. The coming dawn would bring its own challenges, but for the night he belonged to the silence, warmth, and watchful peace within the castle walls. When a knight was away from his castle, the rhythm of his nights changed entirely. Travel, whether for war, a tournament, or to escort a noble, meant adapting to the open road, and whatever shelter could be found, his security of stone walls was replaced by the wide expanse of the countryside, lit only by the moon and stars. Here the night carried a sharper edge, for there was no guarantee of safety beyond the light of the campfire. As evening approached, the first priority was to find a suitable place. To make camp, a knight would often travel with squire soldiers, and sometimes servants. Together, they sought a location that offered both concealment and a clear view of the surrounding land forest edges. Hillsides and riverbanks were common choices, but each carried risks. A hilltop gave visibility, yet left them exposed, while dense woods offered cover, but could hide enemies. For a knight, these decisions were not left to chance. The choice of camp could mean the difference between a quiet night and an ambush. Once the site was chosen, work began quickly. Fires had to be built, tents pitched, and horses cared for. Above all, the knight made sure his mount was fed and watered, for without a healthy horse, his effectiveness in battle or travel was severely limited. Squires took the lead in these tasks, while the knight oversaw them, offering instructions and ensuring no detail was overlooked. The campfire became the center of the temporary world, its warmth pushing back the night and its light, offering a fragile sense of security. Meals on the road were far simpler than those in a castle. Roasted meat, if hunting had been successful, hard-bread cheese, and dried fruit were common. A knight ate with his men, sharing the same food and the same smoke-filled air. Stories and quiet talk passed between mouthfuls, often turning into discussions of the journey ahead. If the mission was dangerous, plans were reviewed, routes reconsidered, and scouts assigned for the morning. A knight's mind was always at work, balancing the need for rest with the demands of duty. When the food was gone and the fire burned lower, the camp settled into its watch system. Guards were posted in shifts, walking the perimeter or sitting quietly at lookout points. A knight might take a shift himself, especially if the danger was high. This was not merely to lead by example, but also to keep a personal sense of the night's mood. The rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a wolf, the faint splash of water in a stream. Each sound was measured for its meaning. In the open countryside, even the smallest noise could signal trouble. For many nights, the quiet of the road offered rare moments of reflection, away from the political games of the castle and the constant press of training. He might sit beside the fire, staring into the flames and thinking of home. The faces of family or comrades lost in battle could drift into his mind. The medieval world was full of uncertainty, and a knight knew that each journey might be his last. Such thoughts were not spoken aloud, but they were carried like an invisible weight through the night. Physical demands of travel made rest essential, yet sleeping in the field was never truly deep. A knight might rest in a simple bedroll beneath a tent, or in colder months, wrap himself in furs and sleep near the fire. Armor was usually removed, but weapons stayed close within reach of his hand. A shield might serve as both protection and makeshift. Headdress, the awareness that danger could strike at any moment, kept the mind half awake, even in the small hours on. Some nights the road was more forgiving, and the journey passed through friendly lands. In such cases, the knight might be granted shelter in a local manor abbey or village inn. These nights were a gift. The warmth of a bed, the taste of hot food, and the company of locals provided a welcome break from the hardships of travel. Knights were respected figures, and their arrival often stirred curiosity. Villagers might gather to hear tales of battles, and distant lands, offering their own hospitality and return religious duty, did not pause during travel. If the road passed near a chapel or monastery, a knight would often stop to offer prayers and receive blessings. From the clergy, in the camp itself, he might kneel quietly by the fire, crossing himself and reciting prayers before lying down. Faith was a constant companion on the road, just as it was within the castle. It was both a source of comfort and a moral compass guiding his choices in unfamiliar lands. The road also tested a knight's leadership. Each night in camp was a chance to strengthen bonds with his men. Sharing the same hardships created a sense of unity and trust. A knight who cared for the well-being of his companions and faced the same discomforts they endured earned loyalty that could not be bought or commanded. This loyalty was as important in battle as skill with the sword for men fought harder for leaders they respected. Was often the greatest challenge of life on the road. A clear night under the stars could be beautiful, but a sudden storm could turn the camp into a mire of mud and cold rain. Armor rusted quickly without proper care, so even in bad weather the knight and his squire worked to dry and oil it. Wet gear meant slower movement and greater danger the next day. Horses needed extra attention in such conditions for their health, determined the speed and safety of the entire party. The stars themselves became companions on the road. A knight who traveled often learned to navigate by them, knowing which constellations pointed north or marked the passing hours of the night. In quieter moments, he might gaze upward, feeling the vastness of the world. Around him, the same stars that shone over his castle now stretched over faraway lands, a reminder that while his life was defined by duty, it was also part of something much larger. By the time the first light touched the horizon, the camp would already be stirring. Fires were stoked for a quick breakfast, tents were struck, and horses saddled. A knight checked his weapons and armor for the day ahead, his mind shifting back to the tasks at hand. A night might have been peaceful or tense, but either way, it was only a pause in the greater journey. For a night on the road, the darkness was never an ending, only a different chapter in the ongoing demands of service, honor, and survival. Under the stars and beside the fire, he lived the same truth. Each night brought its own test and its own small victories before the march began again. When a knight returned from the duties of the day and the castle gates were closed for the night, his world often narrowed to the space of his private chamber. For those of higher rank or long service, this space could be surprisingly comfortable. Compared to the hardships of the road or the barracks of lesser men, the knight's chamber was more than a place to sleep. It was a sanctuary, a place to prepare for the next day, to reflect on the last, and to surround himself with the symbols of his life and duty. The chamber itself varied greatly, depending on wealth and position. A well-respected knight might have thick wooden doors, a stone fireplace, a large bed with a mattress of straw, feathers, or wool, and heavy blankets of fur or woven wool to keep out the cold. Lesser-ranked knights might have smaller rooms with only the basics: a bed, a chest for personal items, and perhaps a small table. Yet even in modest quarters, the knight's chamber was organized with a purpose. Armor stands and weapon racks lined the walls. Everything had its place, so that in the event of a sudden alarm, a knight could arm himself in moments. After a long day, the first task was often to remove the armor piece by piece. Heavy plates and chainmail were set aside, cleaned, and oiled by the knight, or more often by his squire. Removing armor was not simply about comfort. It was about ensuring it would be ready and functional the next time it was needed. Even a single loose strap or a small patch of rust could become dangerous in battle. The sound of metal being unbuckled and placed on its stand was as much a part of the knight's night as the sound of the fire crackling in the hearth. Once free of armor, the knight could enjoy greater comfort. A tunic or robe replaced the rigid steel, and the warmth of the fire became more welcome. He might sit in a sturdy chair near the hearth, with a cup of wine or ale letting the heat sink into muscles sore from training or patrol outside the castle. Walls the knight could be wild and dangerous, but here in his chamber the knight could allow himself to relax, at least for a time. The chamber was also a place for personal reflection. Medieval knight lived by the code of chivalry, which demanded not just skill in arms, but also moral strength. Many knights kept devotional books, prayer beads, or small religious icons near their beds. These were used in evening prayers, which were often the final act before sleep, kneeling at a small prayer. Stand or even beside the bed, the knight would thank God for the day's safety, ask forgiveness for any failings, and seek protection for the night ahead. Letters were another part of a knight's private evening life. He might receive correspondence from family, allies, or lords containing news of political developments, family matters, or requests for service. If the knight could write, he would respond by candlelight, taking care with each word. If not, a clerk or scribe would be summoned to write on his behalf. These letters could be formal reports or deeply personal messages to loved ones far away. Writing was a way to maintain connections across great distances and to preserve a sense of belonging beyond the castle walls. The knight's chamber also reflected his identity. Personal trophies from tournaments, hunts, or battles might decorate the walls. Shields bearing his coat of arms, a favored weapon retired from battle, or a banner awarded for service could be displayed prominently. These were not only mementos, but reminders of the life he had chosen and the reputation he had built. They told the story of his victories and the duties he had fulfilled, and they served to inspire him for the challenges yet to come. Despite the sense of safety, the knight's chamber was never entirely a place of rest without caution. The door could be barred, but his sword and dagger were always kept within reach. In the medieval world, peace was fragile, and even the most secure castle could be threatened by treachery or sudden attack. The knight's bed was often positioned so he could see the door and move quickly if needed. This habit of readiness was not born from paranoia, but from the realities of a life where danger could come at any hour. The knight in the chamber was also a time to plan for the coming day. If there were training sessions to lead, the knight would review his tactics. If he expected travel, he would ensure his gear was ready, and his squire prepared provisions. If there was to be a meeting with his lord or a council, he would think through his words and any advice he might offer. A knight's mind was rarely idle, even in private moments. Every decision was measured against his duty to serve, protect, and uphold the chivalric code. Comfort in the chamber was relative to the age and season. In winter, the fire was kept burning through the night, and extra blankets were piled high. In summer, the windows might be left open to let in the cool night air, though this also meant hearing the sounds of the courtyard below, from the clatter of a late arriving messenger to the distant barking of the guard dogs. The atmosphere in the chamber changed with the seasons, yet it was always a place where the knight could gather his strength. Sometimes, the chamber became a meeting place for close companions or visiting knights. They might speak in hushed tones over matters of strategy, politics, or personal affairs. Trusted friends could share thoughts more openly within the walls of a private chamber than in the public spaces of the castle. These meetings might last late into the night, and the flicker of the hearth would cast long shadows across the room as voices rose and fell in quiet discussion. But most nights in the chamber ended in solitude. After prayers, the knight would settle into bed, pulling the blankets tightly around himself. He might listen to the sound of the wind outside, or the faint drip of water somewhere deep within the castle. Walls, the heat from the fire would fade slowly, and the weight of the day would finally lift from his mind. Though his body rested, his mind often wandered through memories and possibilities, lingering on both past battles and future journeys. Knight's chamber was not a place of luxury in the modern sense, but in the harsh world of the Middle Ages, it was a place of great value. It offered warmth, safety, and a small measure of privacy. It was where a knight could remove the weight of steel and the heavier weight of constant vigilance. It was a space where he could think, feel, and prepare without the eyes of the court or the demands of the field pressing upon him. In the stillness of this room, with the fire casting its last glow, he found the balance between the warrior he had to be and the man he was beneath the armor, a balance he would carry into the dawn when duty once again called him to rise and face whatever the day might bring. Not every night for a medieval knight was spent in the comfort of the great hall or in the warmth of his chamber. Some nights belonged entirely to duty, and those were the nights of the watch, when a knight was assigned to oversee the castles. Night guard, he stepped into a role that demanded constant awareness. Every sense had to remain sharp, and every step was taken with the understanding that he was the first line of defense. Should danger approach, the watch began as the castle shifted. From the business of day to the quiet of night, torches were lit along the walls, casting a flickering light over the stone and making shadows dance in the corners. The drawbridge, if the castle had one, was raised, and the portcullis lowered the main. Gates were secured with thick iron bolts. While guards manned their stations, the knight in charge would inspect each post, walking the length of the battlements to make sure no corner of the castle's defenses was neglected. Being on watch meant moving between points of security. The knight checked the wall walk where guards kept their eyes on the dark fields beyond the moat. He ensured that the lookouts in the towers were alert and that their signal horns were within reach. He might stop at the stables to see that the horses were calm and ready in case of a sudden call to arms. He might visit the armory to confirm that weapons were accessible for the guards under his command. These inspections were not just about readiness, but about setting an example. A knight who took the watch seriously inspired his men to do the same. The night air on the wall was often colder than expected, even in summer. The wind could cut through a cloak and chill the skin. The knight paced steadily to keep warm and to keep his mind from drifting. The fields beyond the castle could appear calm under the moonlight, but the knight knew how quickly that calm could be broken. He listened for sounds that did not belong: the crack of a branch, splash of water in the moat, the quiet shuffle of movement just beyond the reach of the torchlight. During quiet hours, the knight might speak softly with the guards, sharing a brief story or words of encouragement. While the conversation could be light, there was an unspoken rule that vigilance came first. Any lapse in attention could be disastrous. Knights understood that a single moment of carelessness could give enemies the chance they needed to scale the walls or slip through a gate. The responsibility weighed heavily, but it was accepted as part of the life they had chosen. The watch also included responsibility for internal safety. While the outer walls protected against invaders, the knight also had to be alert for trouble. Within the castle itself, fires, accidents, or disputes between soldiers could all occur at night. A sudden argument in the barracks might need to be settled before it escalated. A kitchen fire could spread quickly if not handled immediately. The knight's authority extended to every corner of the castle, and during the watch he bore full responsibility for its peace. At certain times, the watch required stillness rather than movement. The knight might stand silently on a tower platform, gazing across the countryside. The stars above seemed endless, the dark shapes of the surrounding hills almost blending into the night sky. In these moments, the world felt both vast and quiet, yet the knight never forgot that somewhere beyond those hills an enemy could be moving. Even the beauty of the night could not distract him from the possibility of danger. The watch was not without its challenges. Fatigue was an ever-present enemy. The body naturally wanted to rest in the small hours, and the mind could grow sluggish. To counter this, the knight and his men rotated duties. No guard stayed at a single post for too long, and brief walks or stretches of movement were encouraged. The knight himself avoided sitting unless absolutely necessary, knowing that the moment he grew too comfortable, his alertness might falter. Sometimes the watch brought sudden bursts of activity. A strange light on the horizon might turn out to be nothing more than a distant campfire, but it demanded investigation. The sound of hooves in the distance could mean a messenger arriving or a threat approaching. The arrival of travelers seeking shelter in the middle of the night required careful questioning and a quick judgment call. The knight had to decide in moments whether to open the gates or turn them away, for the safety of all inside weather added its own layer of difficulty. Rain made the stone walls slippery, and reduced visibility fog could roll in from a nearby river or valley thick enough to hide an entire force until they were nearly at the walls. Snow muffled sound making it harder to detect movement, but its brightness under the moonlight could also make intruders easier to spot. Each change in weather altered the way the watch was conducted, and the knight adjusted his tactics accordingly. The watch was also a time when the knight's mind often wandered to thoughts of honor and loyalty. Standing on the wall, looking out at the land he was sworn to protect, the knight was reminded of why he served. His oath bound him not only to his lord, but to the people who lived within those walls. Farmers, artisans, servants, and children all slept safely because he and his men remained vigilant. That knowledge turned the long hours into something more than duty. It became a point of pride. When the darkest hours began to give way to the first pale light of dawn, the watch drew to a close. The knight made one final round of the battlements, checking that all was secure before handing the responsibility over to the day guard. If the night had been quiet, there was relief, but also a recognition that peace was never permanent. The next night could be entirely different. I, knight who had spent the hours in constant readiness, could now finally allow himself to rest for a medieval night. The night watch was more than a task. It was a reminder that his role extended far beyond the battlefield. It was a test of endurance, discipline, and leadership. It required the ability to act decisively in moments of uncertainty and to inspire others to do the same. Every night on watch reinforced the unbreakable connection between the knight, his comrades, and the safety of the place they defended. In the end, it was this commitment that defined the knight's life and made him ready to answer the call, whether in the cold stillness of the night or in the chaos of the day. There is a strange stillness that settles over a medieval castle in the hours before dawn. The great halls that once rang with the clamor of voices and the clink of goblets now rest in silence. Even the animals in the stables seem to sense the approaching day, yet remain calm in their stalls. It is during these quiet hours that a knight often found a kind of peace that could not be reached in the chaos of daylight. It was a time to gather thoughts tend to small but important tasks and ready the mind and body for the challenges ahead. For a knight who had spent the night in his chamber, the early hours began before the sun touched the horizon. Waking early was not a matter of choice, but of discipline. The life of a knight was bound to the needs of his lord and the demands of readiness. There was always the possibility that the day would bring travel battle or unexpected orders. Rising before others was a way to prepare without distraction. It allowed a knight to think through the day's plans while the rest of the castle still slept. One of the first tasks was often prayer. Before putting on armor or touching a weapon, the knight would kneel at a small altar or before a crucifix to offer thanks for the night's protection and to seek guidance for the day to come. These prayers were not hurried but deliberate. The knight knew that faith was as important to his code as skill with a sword. In the candlelight, the words spoken felt more intimate than the grand services held in the chapel during the day. Here in private, the knight could admit his fears and his hopes without judgment. After prayer came the tending of equipment. A knight's armor and weapons were his livelihood and his life. Neglecting them was not an option. Even if the squire had already cleaned the mail and polished the plate, the knight would run his own eyes and hands over each piece, checking for cracks, dents, or signs of rust. A small flaw could mean disaster in battle. The sword was drawn and tested for balance. The edge was felt with a thumb, and if necessary sharpened on a whetstone. The sound of metal against stone was a quiet, steady rhythm in the morning stillness. The pre-dawn hours were also a time for physical readiness. A knight who expected to ride long distances or fight in battle needed to keep his body strong. Some preferred simple stretches and slow movements to warm the muscles. Others might practice with a wooden sword, moving through drills they had learned as squires. These exercises were not about show, but about keeping the body responsive and the mind focused. A single mistake in combat could be the difference between life and death, and training in the early hours kept both skill and reflex sharp. Food was another consideration. Breakfast for a knight was usually simple bread, cheese, perhaps some cold meat, and ale or watered wine. This meal was not about indulgence, but about energy for the day ahead. Sometimes it was eaten alone in the chamber, sometimes in the company of a few other early risers. The kitchens were only just beginning to stir with activity, so the food was whatever could be taken quickly without disrupting the cooks, who would later prepare meals for the lord and his household. For knights with responsibilities beyond the battlefield, the quiet hours before dawn could also be used for reviewing plans and reports. A knight who served as a steward or advisor might go over records of supplies, the state of the garrison, or messages from allied lords. These tasks required clear thinking and the calm of early morning was ideal for making decisions without the pressure of others demanding immediate answers. Some knights even kept their own written records, though literacy was not universal among the warrior class. If the day ahead involved travel, the knight would also take this time to see to his horse. Horses were as vital as armor, and the bond between knight and steed was strong. Walking into the stables in the half light, the knight might greet his mount with a pat or a handful of oats. Checking the saddle, bridle, and horseshoes was as much a part of readiness as inspecting a sword. A tired or injured horse could delay a journey or endanger the rider, so these moments of care were essential. The atmosphere of the pre-dawn hours often carried a sense of anticipation. The world outside the castle walls remained dark, but a faint pale light began to gather on the horizon. The guards finishing their night watch were relieved by fresh sentries. The sounds of preparation drifted through the courtyard, boots on stone, the clank of buckets, the soft voices of servants beginning their work. The knight watched these signs of life, returning to the castle knowing that in moments the stillness would give way to the noise and bustle of the day. There were times when the quiet before dawn was interrupted by urgent news. A messenger might arrive after riding hard through the night, bringing word of a border skirmish or a summons from the lord. Such moments shattered the calm but proved why readiness mattered. The knight could respond instantly, gathering his gear, calling for his squire, and being on horseback before the sun had fully risen. This ability to move from peace to action without hesitation was a defining mark of his profession. For those mornings without urgency, the knight might take a final walk along the battlements before the day's duties began. Standing high above the sleeping countryside, he could see the mist lying low over the fields, and the first hints of gold touching the edges of the clouds. The land stretched out in every direction, fields, forests, rivers, and distant villages, all under his lord's protection. In these moments, the knight felt the weight of his oath, but also the honor that came with it. It was a reminder that his role was not just to fight, but to guard and to serve. As the sun broke over the horizon, the castle stirred fully to life. The sound of hammers in the smithy, the smell of baking bread from the kitchens, and the chatter of servants in the courtyard signaled that the quiet hours were over. The knight stepped into the day with his armor ready, his sword sharp, and his mind focused. Whatever the day brought, whether peace or peril, he was prepared to meet it. The quiet hours before dawn were more than just a transition between night and day. They were a time for reflection, preparation, and reaffirmation of purpose. For the medieval knight, these moments offered balance between the demands of war and the responsibilities of peace. They allowed him to move into the coming hours, not as a man, caught off guard by events, but as one ready to meet them with discipline, honor, and unwavering resolve. It was in these still moments that the knight truly became the guardian he was sworn to be.